Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Chanel Crawford and I'm a charter schools consultant at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Today I'm going to be telling you about the Wisconsin Charter Schools program and providing a grant overview. The Wisconsin Charter Schools program, or WCSP, is fully financed by a $95 million federal grant from the U.S. Department of Education. Today, I'm going to start by providing a charter schools overview. I'm then going to shift to speak more specifically about the federal grant. I'll provide grant requirements, tell you more about allowable costs, take you through the application form, the grant review process, provide information about technical assistance requirements for funded applicants, and provide information about requirements for accessing funds for those applicants. Charter schools are established by a contract between an authorizer and a charter school governing board. Charter schools are public, they're publicly funded, tuition-free, and open to all. Attendance at a charter school is voluntary. They're non-sectarian, and they are subject to and participate in major federal programs. Charter schools are known for being flexible and innovative. They're exempt from many state laws. They can be environments of creativity where experimental approaches where experimental approaches are used. They have the potential to be laboratories that influence the larger public school system. They're accountable and held to performance standards included in their contract, and they're part of the state accountability system. An authorizer is a legally designated entity with the authority to charter and contract. That entity is directly responsible for the oversight of charter schools that they have entered into a contract with. They make decisions about renewal and revocation of that charter contract, and they must consider the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, or NACSA, principles and standards. In the state of Wisconsin, all school districts have the ability to authorize a charter school, and there are a number of other entities that do as well, and I'm going to talk about those soon. Wisconsin's first charter school was authorized in 1994. In the 2019-20 school year, there are 236 charter schools in the state of Wisconsin, spread across 92 school districts in every CISA. 211 of those 236 charter schools are district-authorized charter schools, or schools that are authorized by a public school district. The remaining 25 are what we refer to as independently authorized charter schools, sometimes referred to as 2R or 2X charter schools. The 2R or 2X designates what part of state statute provides authority for those specific charter schools to exist. If you're interested in learning more about the charter landscape in this current year, you can see the Wisconsin Charter Schools Quick Facts sheet. You can also review the archives page of the charter school website to review historical information about charter enrollment. Wisconsin's charter school law is Wisconsin Statute, Section 11840. As I mentioned, there are a number of independent authorizers in the state. Again, these are authorizers that are not a school district. You'll notice this chart breaks them up into two sections: legacy ICS authorizers or new ICS authorizers. Legacy ICS authorizers are the City of Milwaukee, UW Milwaukee, UW Parkside, and Milwaukee Area Technical College, or MATC. The new ICS, or Independent Charter School Authorizers, are the Waukesha County Executive, the College of Menominee Nation, Lukutere Ojibwe Community College, the Office of Educational Opportunity, any UW Chancellor other than UW Milwaukee and UW Parkside. Again, those two are legacy ICS authorizers, and any technical college district board, except for MATC, which again is a legacy ICS authorizer. Whether or not a charter school is authorized by a legacy ICS authorizer or a new ICS authorizer has implications related to funding, which we will talk more about later. You can see this chart also provides information about where in the state these authorizers have the authority to enter into a contract to open a school, and it also provides information about the number of schools each authorizer can contract for. So in Wisconsin, charter schools are exempt from Wisconsin statute section 115 to 121 unless explicitly stated otherwise. These are the sections of state statute that generally govern K-12 education. There is some licensing flexibility, so there is a teacher and principal charter school specific license. And there is some flexibility for virtual charter school teachers who teach an online course from a state other than Wisconsin. Aside from these flexibilities, generally speaking, all licensing requirements do apply to charter schools. State assessments are required. A charter school must be governed by an independent board that's its own legal entity. They must have a random admissions process in place if more students want to attend the charter school than there is space available. And there are certain statutory contract requirements. In Wisconsin, authorizers have a number of specific responsibilities. Those are to solicit and evaluate charter applications, consider NACSA principles and standards, give preference to schools that serve at-risk students, approve only charter school applications that serve an identified educational need, monitor performance and compliance for schools that they've entered into a contract for, and submit the annual authorizer report to the state superintendent and the legislature. So there are virtual charter schools in the state of Wisconsin. Virtual charter schools can only be created between a contract of a governing board and a school district. So independent authorizers cannot enter into a contract to authorize a virtual charter school. Virtual charter school status is required for students open enrolling in a virtual charter school and attending remotely. There are additional requirements for virtual charter schools in a number of areas. It's important to note that attending a virtual charter school is not homeschooling. In the 2019-20 school year, there are 48 virtual charter schools in Wisconsin and over 6,000 students enrolled in those virtual charter schools. The charter contract has to be signed by two parties. Again, that's the authorizer and the governing board or operator of the charter school. A charter contract cannot exceed 5 years, and there are certain statutory contract requirements. So, for example, schools must share the procedures for disciplining students in that contract. We have a benchmarks document on the authorizer webpage, and that document has information about what is required to be in a contract. The contract also has to have information related to situations in which the contract could be related to renewal and revocation of that contract. And again, the authorizer is making decisions about whether or not to renew or revoke that contract. So the contract for a district authorized charter school must specify the amount to be paid to the school each year of the contract. It also must specify how financial and programmatic audits will occur. Charter schools must receive their fair share of federal funding, both formula and discretionary, and DPI works to help ensure this. For district authorized charter school pupils are included in the district membership. Earlier, I mentioned that the funding is a little bit different depending on whether an independent charter school has been authorized by a legacy independent authorizer or a new independent authorizer. And this chart provides some information about that. So you'll see that the 2019-20 FTE or full-time equivalent payment amount is $8,911. If a school is authorized by a legacy ICS or independent charter school authorizer, the funding source is a proportional state general aid reduction from all school districts. If an independent charter school is authorized by a new ICS authorizer, the funding source is an aid transfer equal to ICS payment from the resident school districts of the students attending that charter school. This chart also provides some information about whether or not students are included in the district state aid and how they impact the district's revenue limit. I'm going to shift to talking a little bit more specifically about the federal grant now. So the Federal Charter Schools Program is authorized under Title IV, Part C, Expanding Opportunity Through Quality Charter Schools of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 as amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act, sections 4301 to 4311. The purpose is to support charter schools that serve early childhood, elementary school, or secondary school students. Wisconsin was one of 9 states to receive an award under the FY17 State Entities Grant Program. Wisconsin received the largest award that year at $95 million. Wisconsin is required to spend at least 90% of that on subgrants, at least 7% on technical assistance activities, and no more than 3% on administrative costs. State entities like Wisconsin can award subgrants to eligible applicants to open and prepare for the operation of new schools, open and prepare for the operation of replicated high-quality schools, or to expand high-quality schools. The Wisconsin Charter Schools program has 3 main objectives. Those are 1, to support the growth of high-quality charter schools in Wisconsin, especially those focused on improving academic outcomes for educationally disadvantaged secondary charter school students. 2, strengthen and improve authorizing quality and promote the adoption of best practices for all authorizers in Wisconsin. And 3, promote and support collaboration and sharing of best practices between high-quality charter schools and other schools in the state, especially those that experience difficulty in adequately serving educationally disadvantaged students. In order to receive these CSP funds, a school must meet the federal definition of charter school as set forth in Section 4310 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act. I'm going to share that definition with you now. A charter school is a public school that, in accordance with specific state statute, is exempt from significant state or local rules that inhibit the flexible operation and management of public schools, but not from any rules relating to the other requirements of this paragraph. Is created by a developer as a public school, or is adapted by a developer from an existing public school and is operated under public supervision and direction. Operates in pursuit of a specific set of educational objectives determined by the school's developer and agreed to by the authorized public chartering agency. Provides a program of elementary or secondary education, or both. Is nonsectarian in its programs, admission policies, employment practices, and all other operations, and is not affiliated with a sectarian school or religious institution. Does not charge tuition, and complies with a number of federal laws that you'll see listed in Section G. Is a school to which parents choose to send their children and then admit students on the basis of a lottery if more students apply for admission than can be accommodated. Agrees to comply with the same federal and state audit requirements as do other elementary schools and secondary schools in the state, as specifically defined in Wisconsin Statute Section 11840. Meets all applicable federal, state, and local health and safety requirements. Operates in accordance with state law. Has a written performance contract with the authorized public chartering agency in the state that includes a description of how student performance will be measured in charter schools pursuant to state assessments that are required of other schools and pursuant to any other assessments mutually agreed to by the authorized public chartering agency and the charter school. And a charter school finally may serve students in early childhood education programs or post-secondary students. In that definition, you may have heard me use the word developer. The term developer means an individual or group of individuals, including a public or private nonprofit organization, which may include school staff, parents, and other members of the local community who are working collaboratively to create a charter school. You may have heard me use the term educationally disadvantaged students when I was talking about the WCSP objectives. The term educationally disadvantaged students means economically disadvantaged students, students with disabilities, migrant students, limited English proficient students, also referred to as English learners or English language learners, neglected or delinquent students, or homeless students. An eligible applicant for CSP funds is a developer that has applied to an authorizer to operate a charter school and has provided adequate and timely notice to the authorizer that an application for federal charter school funds will be submitted. Charter schools that have an approved application through other federal CSP grant competitions are not also eligible for funding under this grant competition. An eligible applicant may not receive more than one subgrant under the CSP for each individual charter school for a 5-year period, unless they have demonstrated at least 3 years of improved educational results for students enrolled in the charter school with respect to the elements described in the high-quality charter school definition. We're going to go through that definition later in the presentation. The U.S. Department of Education requires that each charter school receiving these funds have a high degree of autonomy over budget and operations, including autonomy over personnel decisions. Wisconsin charter school applicants must demonstrate a high degree of autonomy in the application and must meet the requirements related to board powers and structure specified in Wisconsin Statute Section 11840. So Wisconsin Statute Section 11844 specifies that a majority of governing board members must not be employees of the school or employees or officers of the school district. However, under federal CSP policy, no governing board members can be employees or officers of the authorizer. Under Wisconsin Statute 11844D, a governing board has the power to receive and disperse funds, secure insurance, enter into contracts, incur debt, pledge, assign, encumber assets for loans, solicit and accept gifts or grants for school purposes, acquire real property, and sue and be sued in their own name. To be eligible for grant funds, governing boards must provide evidence of Wisconsin non-stock corporation or nonprofit status. So funds are available to open and prepare for the operation of new charter schools. These are called implementation subgrants. They can potentially be planning and implementation subgrants if the applicant chooses to take a planning period. A newly established charter school may apply for an implementation subgrant during the CSP application period, provided that the school is within the 3-year implementation window and the school has never received a CSP planning implementation subgrant award. In other words, the school cannot have been in operation more than 3 years and apply for an implementation grant. The subgrant period can be broken down into 2 phases, the planning phase, which can exceed 12 months, and the implementation phase, which cannot exceed 48 months if that 12-month planning phase is taken. In other words, the duration of the subgrant period cannot exceed 60 months in total. When the subgrant is awarded, if the school is already operational, then the subgrant immediately enters its implementation phase and no planning phase is available. The school will be awarded an implementation subgrant for no more than the first 5 years of operation. Funds are also available for the replication or expansion of high-quality charter schools. A high-quality charter school is a charter school that shows evidence of strong academic results, which may include strong student academic growth, has no significant issues in the areas of student safety, financial and operational management, or statutory or regulatory compliance, and has demonstrated success in significantly increasing student academic achievement, including graduation rates for all students and for each of the subgroups of students served by the charter school. The term replicate means to open a new charter school or a new campus of a high-quality charter school based on the educational model of an existing high-quality charter school under an existing charter contract or an additional charter contract. The term expand means to significantly increase enrollment or add one or more grades to a high-quality charter school. The term significantly increase means to add at least 20 students or increase enrollment by at least 20%, whichever is greater. In a slow growth expansion, so this would be where you're potentially expanding in ninth grade in 1 year, 10th grade in the next year, and so on. The school must meet the criteria at each grade level for each year of the expansion. For example, the ninth grade expansion must be an increase of 20 students or 20% of ninth graders, whichever is greater. The following year, the 10th grade expansion must be 20 students or 20% of 10th graders, whichever is greater. If you're interested in proposing a slow growth expansion, please contact DPI prior to submitting your application to discuss that proposal. Like the implementation subgrants, the duration of a replication or expansion subgrant cannot exceed 60 months. If a subgrantee proposes a planning period prior to the replication or expansion, that planning period cannot exceed 12 months. And again, that total award period cannot exceed 60 months. When we say there are 60 months of allowable funding, that means 60 consecutive months with no breaks or interruptions. Interruptions in the grant period will result in termination of the subgrant award. So for example, if a school receives a planning and implementation subgrant and is unable to secure a facility by the end of the planning phase, the subgrant for the school will be terminated. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about allowable costs. So in addition to the requirements applicable to all federal funds, subgrantees under the WCSP must limit the use of WCSP funds to the specified uses set forth in Section 4303 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act as amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act. All costs need to be necessary, reasonable, and allocable to the subgrant. The use of funds must also tie directly to the subgrantee's grant type, either implementation, expansion, or replication. I recommend reviewing the Wisconsin Charter Schools Program Allowable Costs Guide. This has some of the information I'm going to discuss in the next few slides, as well as links to information about requirements for federal funds generally, and has a lot of really helpful information. So allowable costs include costs associated with preparing teachers, school leaders, and specialized instructional support personnel, professional development, hiring and compensating during planning, teachers, school leaders, and/or specialized instructional support personnel, acquiring necessary supplies, training, equipment, and educational materials, carrying out necessary renovations to ensure that a new school building complies with applicable statutes and regulations, and minor facility repairs, excluding construction. Providing one-time startup costs associated with providing transportation to students to and from the charter school, carrying out community engagement activities, which may include paying the cost of student and staff recruitment, providing for other appropriate non-sustained costs related to activities in opening and preparing for the operation of charter schools. There are a few things you also may want to consider depending on how your school is set up and what type of subgrant you are applying for. So I'm going to start with planning year considerations. Generally, WCSP costs may not be sustained costs. So generally speaking, costs such as regular salaries are not allowable. However, some costs like this may be allowable if the subgrantee incurs them during a planning year. So for example, during a planning year, the regular salary for an employee to plan and prepare for the operation of the school may be an allowable cost. However, the regular salary for that same employee during any implementation years would not be allowable. So slow growth considerations. Some per pupil costs, which would otherwise be considered sustained costs, may potentially be allowable if the cost is justified under the slow growth framework. This framework only applies to schools planning to add additional grades each year of the grant or expand enrollment in a different grade span each year of the grant. For example, The per pupil cost for an online textbook subscription would be allowable for all students during the first year of operation of a new school that opens with 40 students. If the same school grows to 60 students in the second year of operation, the per pupil cost for the online textbook would only be allowable for the additional 20 students. Subgrantees would have to document the justification for slow growth costs very carefully. Expansion considerations. So expansion subgrantees have to be particularly mindful of connecting costs with the planned expansion. So for example, if a school with 400 students expands to add 100 students under the grant, purchasing 100 computer devices for the new students may potentially be an allowable cost. However, if the school purchased 500 devices for both the new and existing students, the cost of the 400 devices would probably not be an eligible expense. This logic is pretty straightforward when applied to supplies and equipment, items like computers. However, the same logic should be carried through to other costs. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about co-located schools or other schools with shared costs. Co-located schools have to be very careful about ensuring that items charged to the grant serve to benefit the students at the subgrantee school. However, all subgrantees should also be aware of considerations that apply to expenses that are not incurred for the exclusive benefit of the subgrantee. For example, if a co-located school hires a presenter to provide professional development, staff from the non-subgrantee school may not attend the professional development unless the non-subgrantee school incurs a proportionate share of the cost. This consideration still applies when the non-subgrantee school is part of the same school district as a subgrantee school, and also applies when a staff member may be partially employed by both schools. So this is another area where subgrantees would have to maintain documentation to support costs that are proportionately assigned. Some costs that are not allowed include school year salary and fringe benefits, student instruction or online tuition costs, honorariums to governance board members, remodeling or construction. We really encourage you to contact us if you have questions about items prior to submitting a proposal. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the application requirements and application form. DPI Charter Schools Subgrant Application Form, PI 9600, must be used as the cover of the application. You shouldn't use other covers, add title pages, add enclosures, or submit any related materials unless specifically requested. The application narrative, which is Appendix A, may not exceed 25 type pages. Please number the pages you submit, and note that the 25-page limit does not include the pages of the application form itself or the other appendices. If any additional information is required once the application is submitted, DPI will contact the applicant. A minimum of an 11-point font must be used for the body of the application. You'll see that there are 3 allowable fonts. Please make sure you're using one of those 3 fonts. We do require paper copies. That would be the original and 1 copy of the proposal. That must be submitted to us. We also request a digital copy in 2 ways. So first, we're going to ask that you email the components of the application as separate files in 1 email if possible, and then a single document containing all the components in 1 file in another email. You're going to send both of those emails to charterschools@dpi.wi.gov. The general application information section of the instructions have more information about the submission requirements. The first part of the application form asks for general information. So this is the charter school name and address, the authorizer name and contact information for the planning committee representative, governance board president information. Someone applying for a group, applying for a planning and implementation grant may not have a governance board president in place. This is okay, but a planning committee representative is required. You'll have to indicate the grant type, the school's relationship to the district or instrumentality status. All applicants need to provide information about the grade span of the school, and expansion applicants have to provide enrollment projections in this section. There's then a bit of additional information requested about the school. The next section is the requested funding section. This chart on the slide provides information about the maximum total funding available based on grant type. Implementation grants, the maximum total funding amount is up to $900,000. The maximum total funding amount for replication and expansion grant funding is up to $750,000. You'll see that there is an option for a planning period, if allowable. You'll also notice there are extra funds available for schools serving 150 or more students, or schools focused on improving educational outcomes for educationally disadvantaged secondary or grades 6 through 12 charter school students. An applicant may request to carry over unspent funds from the planning phase to the operational phase, but all subgrant funds, again, must be expended by the end of the grant period, which cannot exceed 60 months in total. The next section of the application form is the assurances. Please read these carefully. They're for both the authorizer and the grant recipient. They're assuring compliance with applicable laws and regulations and ensuring participation in required monitoring, technical assistance, and more. Then the signature section is next. The application must be signed by an authorizer representative and the charter school governing board president, or planning committee representative if the governing board president is not yet in place. The final section is the certification covering debarment. This is tied to federal regulations and certification regarding debarment, suspension, ineligibility, and voluntary exclusion. This must be signed by an authorized representative for the prospective participant. I'm going to highlight one assurance that is in that assurance section. That's that each school receiving these funds must have an annual independent audit of its financial statements, prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, reviewed by the charter school's authorizer, and publicly recorded. For district authorized charter schools, please note that this must be separate from your district audit. So if you are typically rolled up into your district audit, this would be something additional and separate you would need to do. Then we get to the appendices. Appendices A through F are required for all applicants. Appendix A is the application narrative. This is the section that cannot exceed 25 pages. Appendix B are letters of support. So these are 3 letters of support from stakeholders. Appendix C is the evidence of charter school approval. So this is either an executed contract or school board resolution or letter from the authorizer approving the new or expanded charter school. Appendix D are performance measures for the grant. Appendix E is the 5-year budget summary. This is the grant budget. And again, anything in this grant budget should be an allowable cost as described earlier. Appendix F is the expense and revenue worksheet. This allows you to provide the total projected cost of operating the charter school for 5 years. So this Appendix F is not specific to only the grant. Appendices G through I are only required for expansion and replication applications. Appendix G is the evidence of high quality. So this is where you will provide data related to academic achievement, attendance, student retention, and discipline for each subgroup of students that the charter school serves. Appendix H is the most recent annual authorizer report. And Appendix I are governing board minutes from the last 12 months. When we receive the application, each application will first undergo a technical review by WCSP staff to ensure compliance with eligibility requirements. Any applicants that are unable to meet eligibility requirements will not be considered for funding. Those applications that pass the technical review will then be evaluated and rated by an experienced external peer review panel whose members have no vested interest in the applications under consideration. A minimum score of 35 out of 50 is required on the peer reviewer benchmarks to be considered for funding. An application that receives less than 35 points will not be considered for funding. Replication and expansion grant applicants must also score at least 7 points. In Section 7 of the narrative, that's the section focused on high quality. The peer review score is the single most determining factor in funding recommendations. DPI may also consider other factors such as geographic distribution and grade level distribution and may provide a preference to schools serving secondary grades and rural communities. Schools that submit a proposal that is not selected for funding may, in subsequent application periods, resubmit their proposal in a revised form or submit a new proposal, assuming they continue to meet eligibility requirements. Appeals and reconsiderations of award decisions are not considered. The grant process is competitive, so only the best applications will be approved. And we really recommend that applicants review the reviewer benchmarks to ensure all required questions have been answered thoroughly and appropriately. The DPI will only consider awarding funds to those applicants who submit a comprehensive and viable application likely to improve student academic achievement. Consistent with federal regulations, the DPI evaluates each subrecipient's risk of noncompliance with federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and conditions of the subaward. Before awarding grants under this competition, the DPI conducts a review of the risks posed by applicants and determines appropriate subrecipient monitoring. Under federal regulations, the department may impose special conditions and, in appropriate circumstances, high-risk conditions on a grant if the applicant or subgrantee is not financially stable, has a history of unsatisfactory performance, has a financial or other management system that does not meet federal standards, has not fulfilled the conditions of a prior grant, or is otherwise not responsible. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about grant logistics. For a district authorized subgrantee, the chartering authority or district typically serves as the fiscal agent for the grant. However, how this is set up is a decision that the governing board of the charter school must make. Subgrant expenditures will be reimbursed by the DPI according to established procedures, and recipients must account for funds using codes from the Wisconsin Uniform Financial Accounting Requirements, or WUFR. The DPI is responsible for monitoring all CSP subgrants. To fulfill this monitoring responsibility, the DPI requires funded applicants to submit appropriate fiscal and program documentation. In addition, WCSP staff will conduct on-site visits of funded applicants. The purpose of the visits is to review information submitted by applicants and gather additional information from interviews and observations for technical assistance, monitoring, and evaluation purposes. The CSP program will utilize WISE grants for budgeting and claiming. And as a condition of the award, subgrantees and their authorizers will be required to participate in technical assistance activities. The Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools, or WORCS, serves as the technical assistance network for the WCSP and is comprised of multiple collaborating organizations. The Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools oversees a great deal of the required technical assistance. Most of the technical assistance requirements have a competency focus. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides. WORCS also hosts an annual conference. This is a 2-day conference that typically occurs in either July or August. 3 representatives from a sort of awarded applicant have to attend this conference annually. That's a governing board representative, an authorizer representative, and a school representative. Awarded applicants will also participate in WORCS Mentor Schools program. A representative for each funded applicant must complete the Promoting Excellence for All e-course. This e-course helps educators deepen their understanding and use of strategies proven to close the achievement gap. There are 3 modules that are part of this e-course. The first one focuses on understanding race in education. The second focuses on exploring data. And the third focuses on actually utilizing the strategies. Finally, all subgrantees are required to participate in monthly calls with DPI. So WORCS creates materials, technical assistance, and trainings focused on a number of audiences. Those are listed under the WRCCS or WORCS domains. You can see the WORCS competencies are at the center of a lot of their other work. There are over 100 competencies. You can view those on Works website. They're categorized very nicely there by domain. Works provides many in-person and virtual trainings and has sort of a number of ways available for schools to meet technical assistance requirements and fulfill competencies. So subgrantees are responsible for certain experiences annually each August focused on meeting competencies. The nice thing is there, as I mentioned, are over 100 competencies. This allows schools to personalize their technical assistance and make sure it is meaningful to them. You can see there are requirements related to the school's authorizer, governance board, leader, teacher, and there is one additional requirement for district authorized charter schools. Funds will not be released to awarded applicants unless the DPI has received, reviewed, and approved a fully executed contract that meets all state and federal contract requirements and has reviewed and approved the school's lottery and admission procedures. All items on the assurances of readiness form are complete, and the completed form with appropriate signatures has been submitted to the DPI. If you'd like to view the assurances of readiness form, it's available on the same webpage as the application materials are. The school has submitted its governance board roster, proof of non-stock nonprofit status, and has an approved budget and performance measures. Please note that some requirements are slightly different for the release of planning funds for schools that are not in operation during their planning year. So for example, we do not require a fully executed contract to receive planning funds because that fully executed contract is due during the planning year for a school not yet in operation. Awards may be reduced if the school's third Friday in September pupil count report is considerably less than projected in the grant proposal, if the school is experiencing difficulty expending the funds, or if for some unforeseen reason the DPI's grant is significantly reduced by the U.S. Department of Education. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk with you in more detail about anything I discussed today. I also encourage you to attend one of the in-person grant information sessions. During those sessions, I'll be available to answer any technical questions you have, and we'll be providing more information about the grant narrative and other grant requirements. Thank you so much for your time.